He does not breathe. He does not sleep. He burns. For 10,000 years, the Emperor of mankind has sat upon the golden throne, an engine of salvation and damnation alike. Cables pierce the flesh that remains. The machinery hums hymns that were once screams. Across the galaxy, 1 trillion lives whisper prayers to a God who cannot answer. They call him the savior of humanity. They call him the tyrant of terror. But the truth is simpler and crueler. He is the man who tried to save mankind from itself and found no mercy in victory. Even now, his spirit flickers between life and death, locked within a prison of his own creation. Every second of his existence sustains an Imperium that has forgotten his purpose. He sits upon the edge of eternity, silent, vigilant, and utterly alone. Long before the stars had names, before terror was even whole, there was a man born outside time. Some say he was crafted by a conclave of ancient shamans, souls merged into one to guide their species away from extinction. Others whisper he is the last echo of an age before reason, a being shaped from humanity's collective will to endure. Whatever the truth, he walked among primitive tribes and rising empires alike. He saw kings crowned and slain, prophets adored and forgotten. He learned that every truth eventually becomes a weapon, and every god demands blood. He watched quietly. Empires burned, rose again, and turned to dust beneath his patient gaze. Each collapse taught him that faith without understanding breeds chains. Each rebirth convinced him that reason alone could not silence the darkness men carried within. He guided from the shadows, an advisor here, a visionary there, a stranger who whispered impossible ideas into receptive minds. But the centuries turned, and the whispers became echoes of futility. Humanity's cycle of self-destruction never changed. So he resolved to end it. He would no longer be the hidden guardian. He would become the architect of order. The age of strife was not an age. It was a cataclysm stretched over millennia. Warp storms raged across the void, cutting worlds off from one another. Psychers erupted among ordinary humans, their uncontrolled minds tearing rifts that swallowed entire cities. The galaxy that had once glittered with mankind's triumphs drowned in madness. On Terra, civilization shattered into techno-barbarian warlords. The cradle of humanity became a wasteland of irradiated deserts and decaying hive cities. Each petty tyrant claimed divine right. Each fought in the name of survival, or vengeance, or simple appetite. It was in this ruin that the hidden immortal revealed himself. He forged armor of radiant gold, a symbol of both light and authority. He gathered armies not through faith, but through unbreakable will. His words promised a new order, an age guided by reason, freed from the chains of superstition. One by one, the warlords fell before him. Some knelt in awe, others burned in defiance. He offered peace with one hand, annihilation with the other, and called it unification. The people hailed him as deliverer, yet his methods were absolute. Where diplomacy failed, extermination followed. When victory came, he erased the memory of the defeated as though they had never existed. Terra became a single banner under his rule, its oceans red with the cost of unity. To his allies, he was the Emperor, title enough for one who needed no name. To his enemies, he was the destroyer of freedoms, the end of ancient bloodlines. But in the silence of his own council, he was only a man fulfilling a purpose written long before his birth. The age of strife ended not with celebration, but with exhaustion. Humanity looked upon the Emperor and saw salvation. He looked upon humanity and saw a challenge that would never end. When the storms of old Earth began to clear, The Emperor stepped from secrecy and forged the last of his patience into war. Thunder warriors marched in shining plate, gene-crafted for one purpose: to break the tyrants that fed on humanity's ashes. Cities burned beneath the storm bolts of unity. Each victory was written not in celebration, but in the silence that follows annihilation. He called it peace. Others called it the most efficient extermination Terra had ever known. Through fire and dust, the red deserts turned to glass. The Emperor's banners rose above every fortress. When resistance ended, he looked upon a world finally whole, and already unworthy of him. The Thunder Warriors, crude and unstable, were ended. Their purpose was complete. Perfection required cleaner hands. From their ashes, he would raise something greater. Soldiers not just of flesh and fury, but of discipline, thought, and loyalty. Thus began the vision of the Legiones Astartes. To command his coming legions, he sought sons, not children of blood, but reflections of design. 20 beings, each cast from a fragment of his own mind. They were to be ideals made flesh, leaders, generals, symbols of the future. But perfection does not tolerate theft, and the warp noticed his work. One night the laboratory vaults fell silent. The cradles were empty. Somewhere beyond space, laughter rolled through the Imperium. The Primarchs were scattered across the stars. The Emperor's dream lay broken before it had even breathed. Yet he didn't curse the gods he denied. He built again, creating the first true Space Marines from the same genetic seed. They would be the spears of his crusade, and he would find his sons among the stars. The Great Crusade began as a sunrise across the void. World after world bent the knee. Long-lost colonies of mankind saw banners of gold once more. The scattered Primarchs were found, one by one, each ruling worlds in their own image. Some greeted their father with awe, others with suspicion, but all saw in him the reflection of themselves. For a time there was glory. The Emperor's empire stretched across the void, 1 billion souls bound by his dream of reason. Yet in the quiet between wars, the cracks formed. The Primarchs were not mere extensions of his will. They were men, proud and wounded, seeking meaning in a perfection that denied them choice. He loved them as creations, not as sons. And in that distance, rebellion took root. The Emperor's triumph was never the banner. It was the blueprint. Beneath the imperial palace, deeper than vaults and older than any oath, he labored over a secret more precious than victory, a road that would make war unnecessary. It was not a weapon. It was an escape. The webway, a hidden lattice outside real space, safe from the madness of the warp, could free humanity from demons, from storms, from the need to pray to anything at all. If he could wrest open a gate upon Terra itself, mankind would no longer bleed for every voyage between stars. The Imperium would be a civilization of reason, not of ritual. This was the golden vision he would not share, not with the Mechanicum, who would turn it into a creed, not with his sons, who would turn it into a contest, not with the Imperium, which would drown it in worship. Secrecy, he believed, was mercy. If the Primarchs knew, pride would follow. If the warp knew, ruin would come. So he withdrew from the Great Crusade, handing its thunder to Horus, and returned to Terra to build a door out of history. From this choice flowed 1,000 fractures. Legions felt abandoned. Primarchs felt measured and found wanting. What they saw as neglect, he called focus. What he called prudence, they named contempt. And the vision itself, so bright, cast shadows long enough to hide a catastrophe. For the webway demanded absolute silence. Any break, any intrusion, would splinter its edges and invite the very things it was meant to deny. He trusted in the strength of locks. He did not account for the strength of love. One son, Magnus, saw the future's knife and chose to warn his father. He burst through psychic wards like a comet through glass, despairing, loyal, doomed. His warning landed. The webway did not. It shattered. Predators scented the breach. Some tragedies are not born from malice, but from misaligned virtues. A father guarding a secret to save all. A son breaking that secret to save one. And the price of perfection was demanded in full. They had always been brothers, only in name. Each Primarch was a cathedral to a single idea: duty, beauty, truth, war, faith. Cathedrals do not kneel to one another. They compete for heaven. When the Emperor raised Horus to War Master, the galaxy applauded, then counted slights. Titles balance on pride. Pride balances on wounds. Legions that had bled in silence learned how fast honor can be reassigned by decree. To some, the laurel meant unity. To others, it tasted like favoritism distilled. Among the cracks, whispers gathered. Lorgar, scolded like a child for worship, turned devotion into revenge and found gods eager to be adored. Fulgrim, seduced by perfection, let excellence rot into corruption, so exquisite it wore a smile. Perturabo, tasked to break what others would save, learned to hate a beauty that never thanked the scaffold that held it up. Angron dragged his chain axes and his chain soul across every world that dared call order justice. Each grievance found an echo. Each echo found a choir. Meanwhile, the Emperor's silence hardened into a theology of doubt. He asked for obedience while denying explanations. He trusted that design would suffice where love had not been offered. He mistook precision for intimacy and command for communion. Horus, favored, brilliant, wounded where he felt most seen, was tempted not with lies, but with recognition. Chaos does not merely corrupt, it confirms. It told him he was the axis upon which history turned, and at last he heard a father's voice in a stranger's mouth. When he fell, he did not fall alone. He fell like a continent, dragging coasts and cities with him. At Istvan, loyalty was measured in artillery. Betrayal wore the uniforms of yesterday's parade. Legions that had bled together learned what their blood was worth when counted by new math. News of the War Master's treason spread like a fracture running through tempered glass. Invisible at first, then everywhere at once. Brothers chose sides inside a single breath. Oaths snapped with a grief like bone. And still, the Emperor held to his calculus. He would not descend from terror. He would finish the work beneath it. The webway, salvation, required him to ignore the fire climbing the palace walls of empire. He placed trust in Horus's memory of who he had been, in Rogel Dawn's unyielding geometry, in Sanguinius's light, in Jagatai's speed, in Gilliman's order. But wars are not sustained by faith in other men's bastions. They are sustained by the bastions you defend. In the quiet between battles, some sons stared into the mirror their father had made of them and saw the problem laid bare. If the Emperor loved humanity, why did humanity feel like material? If he despised gods, why did he behave like one? If he promised a future without superstition, why were his children groomed like saints or sacrifices? The answers came in iron and in fire. In cities whose names are now synonymous with lessons, in fleets that learned how fast the light from stars can look like burning libraries. And over all of it, the warp looked on, patient, amused, knowing that the purest accelerant for corruption is not evil but certainty. The suns divided. The fathers of legions became weather systems, and the galaxy prepared to learn what it costs when a dream refuses to admit that men were asked to carry it. The galaxy remembers the Horus heresy as a sequence of battles. In truth, it was a test of an idea, whether loyalty could survive perfection. When one sun turned, it proved that even the brightest reflections of the Emperor's design could twist when the light moved. Whole legions followed, not because they were evil, but because certainty is seductive. They fought believing they defended truth, never realizing that truth had already become opinion. In those years, humanity learned that betrayal is not a moment, but a process. It begins the first time understanding is replaced by assumption. And when father and son met for the last time, the duel was not between God and God, but between two versions of hope, one that demanded order and one that demanded freedom. The Emperor won, but victory demanded his mortality. A body broken, a vision that would have to be kept alive by machines. The Golden Throne was never meant to be a tomb. It was a door, half finished, forced into serving as a lifeline. What once promised escape from the warp became a cage that kept both God and Empire from decay only by degrees. For 10,000 years, that chair has whispered the hum of duty. Around it, priests chant diagnostics as prayers. Engineers offer incense to wires. They call this faith. The Emperor would have called it malfunction. Yet perhaps he foresaw this irony. A species that could not bear the absence of its maker built a religion around his silence. In that silence, the Imperium endures, not enlightened, but unbroken. Time smooths every scar into a symbol. The man who despised gods became one. The scientist who sought truth through reason is now the center of a faith that forbids questions. The ecclesiarchy calls this divine order. Historians might call it entropy with a choir. Each world builds its own portrait of him. Warrior, judge, father, fire. Every one of them is true, and none of them are accurate. The Imperium survives not because it understands its God, but because it cannot imagine life without one. Perhaps that is the Emperor's final gift, or his final punishment. 10 millennia have passed, and still the throne burns. The Emperor's body has not moved, yet his shadow guides every decision made in his name. To the faithful, he is the light that will never fade. To the cynical, he is proof that even perfection requires suffering to sustain it. To the historian, he is both architect and warning, a reminder that control, once absolute, becomes its own cage. Maybe that was always the purpose, to show mankind that divinity is not a reward, but a responsibility that no one can bear forever. The Emperor of mankind endures because he must. The Empire endures because it cannot imagine what comes after. And somewhere in the quiet hum of that eternal machine, the oldest truth of all remains. He will never die, because humanity is not ready to live without him.